So this session is called Planning is Not a Dirty Word. There was going to be stronger versions of Planning, the art of getting shit done, but that's where we are. So who the heck is this guy? I started off, you're all young professionals, so you probably all come from really good degrees. I've got one in archaeology. That's how I started off. And then I worked in broadcasting for a bit, and then I decided to get an MSc in computing, and my mother was thrilled because I was going to get a proper job at some point. And from that, I've been working in project management and governance roles for more than 20 years. That's public safety. That's working with the police at Devon Corps Police and across their software development programs. Worked in education, deploying IT into schools across Bristol and the Southwest and doing consultancy work off the back of that. Done business transformation for local authorities and doing IT stuff. And I worked in New York for a while, working for a company that made video games for casinos and did a lot of their IT projects and offered relocations into One World Trade Center. Then worked in Ireland for a bit on my way back to the Southwest, where I worked for the equivalent of the NHS, the Health Service Executive in Ireland on a business intelligence thing. And until recently, I worked for a large company that made vacuum cleaners, headphones, and other things I legally can't remember anymore. So that's where I'm coming from, my background. I hope you're going to enjoy some of this. Feel free to put questions in the chat. So back to basics. What is planning? It's the process of setting up goals, outlining steps, and organizing resources to achieve desired outcomes effectively and efficiently. And basically, that's just asking the questions, what are we going to do? Agree how you're going to do it, tracking what we said we would do and that it's being done, and then knowing what the next thing is to do. So I know this probably isn't a target reference, but does anybody know who that person is? Feel free to put it in the chat. Anybody? I knew this wouldn't work. Me and my wife had a discussion about this. It's from a very, thank you, GB. Yes, it is Hannibal, of course, and he had a very popular catchphrase, which was, I love it when a plan comes together. And that's what they said at the end of every show, when everything went well together. And that was the thing, probably the reason why I got into project management in the first place, but you kind of get the idea. But why does planning and stuff like that get a bad rap? Well, basically, it's not glamorous or fun. Planning is like wearing a belt and braces at the same time. It's double the security, but half the spontaneity. And this is what I've heard across all the time with all the many projects I've worked in over the years. Why do we have to do this? It'll be fine. We've got loads of time. I know what we have to do. Why write it down? It's too complicated to write down. I love that one in particular. Isn't that the project manager's job? Oh, we've done it 100 times. We just want to get on and write code and do stuff. So that's what I've heard over the time. And I understand that, but depending on how you approach your planning and how you do your work, it can really enhance how your teams collaborate and work together, can help you streamline processes and deliver projects really successfully. So what I'm going to go through is a bit of an overview of some more traditional ways of doing projects that you might have seen and why I think they're not necessarily great and why things move to agile. And I think that's going to help. I hope that's going to be interesting. If you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And away we go. So the traditional form of project planning when I first started, and this is from the 90s, not that I was during the 1970s, this model first started then, was basically waterfall plan, the joy of linear work, going from left to right. You'd have a nice stage where you do your requirements and then you do system design and then we'll build it and do an implementation phase, you test it, deploy it, and then it'd be a maintenance phase. These projects may be 2 years, maybe 3 years long. It's great. Makes it really easy to go from one stage to another. You do lots of documentation to make sure you know what you're doing. And if you're doing work for a company or you're billing it, you know exactly what you said you're going to do. And upfront planning should give you a good idea for cost and time estimation to make sure you kind of know what you're going to get at the end of the day. And it's control. You can't do the next bit until the first one's been done. And that works. You know, it's really common. And in practice, you might have seen this in places you've worked. The project manager basically discusses with the whole team. So what is it you need to do? And the main question you ask is, how long is it going to take? And what you're going to do next? So you can work out how it all links together. And is there anything else that I should know? And you end up creating two main documents out of all this. A Gantt chart, which is that picture on the right, and a RAID log. A Gantt chart is literally a big list of the to-dos. It's an A to B to get the project done. It interlinks all the dependencies. And through that, you kind of call out some big milestone dates, identifies a critical path. And as you're guessing, it's focused on time. These project plans can be thousands upon thousands of lines, and it's a big job to keep updated. And you normally get them updated maybe weekly, depending where you're at. The RAID log is basically a glorified Excel spreadsheet that have four or five tabs. One documenting the risks of all things that might happen to your project and make it go horribly wrong, and what you will do when those risks happen. Assumptions. This doesn't get enough attention in my book. What was your thinking? Explain your clarity. So when people kind of come to it, it's like, oh, that's what you meant. Issues are basically risks that have come live, and it'll be a list of everything that's currently affecting you and what you're doing to make it better. Dependencies. You might reflect it in the Gantt chart, but often it's a good way of making other people clear about the accountabilities of where they are. And the last D, it's a new one that comes, you see from time to time, a decision log, often known as the covering your ass category, when somebody doesn't seem to forget what they said they agreed to at one point. So that's kind of what these documents do. And it helps with that kind of what if factor. Wow. So I come back to that question. Most of those Gantt charts, the person is only really interested in how long is it going to take. And estimating times is really hard. And you'll see from this, this XE graphic is exactly that. You end up kind of thinking it might be it, and then doubling it and divide it by 2 and try and create enough time. But it's hard to work out something you're going to do that far in the future because it might change. You get an idea. So where I think waterfall projects stumble in their terms of planning, you have unclear requirements. Waterfall projects work great for stuff when I've done schools and building projects because it's big lumpy stuff and people can relate to seeing walls going up, IT equipment being put in. But when you start getting unclear requirements, especially within software, the customer, it can really make things a bit messy because I think, oh, well, why are you asking me that detailed question? We'll come back to it. But from a study by the Standish Group, the more unclear requirements, your project's going to take probably 25% longer and it's going to cost you 30% more upfront. And that's a conservative number. If you've read about HS2 as a project, that just skyrockets. The accountants just don't do anything. They roll dice and come up with numbers. Other things that happen on projects, change. Waterfall projects don't like change because they like that plan from left to right. And unfortunately, when you do work like that, the customer's needs will often evolve as they understand what they're doing and what they want. And they'll still want to hit the same go live dates. So it means you have to go through a planning cycle, what the impact of all these things are, and it creates a very reactive behavior. And it's quite a lot of work, especially on when you've got big projects. But my big bugbear with waterfall projects is that most of the time you'll hear about a lessons learned activity that happened at the end of maybe some of the stages or at the very end of the project because we want to know so we do it better for next time, which is great, but there's a high chance you'll never do this project again of this type with the same people, with the same customer. So it's a very good activity. I mean, it generates a lot of paper, but it doesn't actually add any value to the people doing the work in real time. And if you try and iterate what you're doing while it's underway, project managers and projects go, oh, stop changing your mind, just do it the way you said, because that's what the Gantt chart says. That's my big issue for that. In the chat, is anybody currently working on waterfall type projects? Or feel like they're working in this space? So sorry to hear that, Oliver. Sorry, Curtis. Yes. Oh, Mr. Duffield, lovely to see you. So yeah, waterfall projects. The thing that is really important is that they work when people want to see what the journey is. But especially software projects, things where people, I'll come back. The problem with big building projects, things like people appreciate the amount of work it takes to put stuff up and very tangible things. But when you're working in software or electronics, it's hard and people don't understand that because it's just some lines of code and it's more complicated than just showing that on a Gantt chart. So there are better ways to do it. So I'm going to come on to a different approach. Yes, Curtis, absolutely. Lesson that if I always end up empty at the end of the project, yes. Just generate one in ChatGPT. It'll be the same, you know, at least you have some paper to look at. So there's a different approach. It got generated, came up really through the late 90s, but in 2001, a load of very good software developers got together and they kind of put together this thing called the Agile Manifesto. And it's basically 4 lines where the preference is individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. And that is, while there's value of items on the right, we value items on the left more. Now, that's quite powerful. And it doesn't mean you heavily go to the left either. I've seen this in discussions with companies. It's finding the blend of where you're at in terms of who you're working with and what you're doing. But it's still getting stuff done. But it says, let's not worry too much about process. Let's work at the people and how we're working together. Let's look at actually having something to show some value in terms of working software. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. This is really important to me, and it should be. I've got lots of notes, so I might jump into. But whenever people write a plan, it's very easy on a waterfall project plan not to feel like it's your plan. It is yours. You take ownership of this stuff. And when you write a contract, it's the same thing. It can be very us and them. But if you can get collaboration and partnership, there's better understanding. There'll be more engagement. Should be better. And responding to change, recognize the fact that it happens. And don't let it be a thing to worry about. So off the back of that, it kind of generated some 12 principles of things like things you should aim for. Part of it. There is lots of this stuff on the internet. I'm just trying to find the best stuff, make it easy for people to digest. But the big ones, you want to have satisfied customers. You want people who are motivated and want to work together. You want to have encourage face-to-face conversation. You want to have working software. I mean, we all want that, but it should be the key thing to show that it's actually working. And based off that, you want frequent delivery. Waterfall projects, they want a release. But who works in software? There's always releases. There's unfortunately, some people put bugs in. You need to do updates. There'll be new features. You want to build on stuff. You want to make that really engaging. You want to collaborate. You want to kind of share the ideas, not about individuals working at lone laptops. What can you do together as a group? You want technical excellence. You want it to be good. And sustainable development is a real biggie for me. You want the teams who are working the stuff to be able to keep working together long term. You want them to be working at a pace that is sustainable. You don't want to be like, well, the waterfall project, they'll often hear that one last push. And it's like, oh, great, we'll do more hours. Will we get more money? No, but that's what we have to do to achieve the goal. Well, that's tiring and exhausting, and no one enjoys it, especially if you know it happens all the time. But if you can find your ways of working to make sure it's continued, everyone's going to be happy. So how do you do this then? There are no rules. There's no procedures. It's open to interpretation. There's no one size fits all. But there are lots of kind of agreed upon flavors of Agile. You've got Kanban, which looks at the flow of work. You've got extreme programming more. But I'm going to talk about Scrum and how I introduced it at Dyson. So when I joined the team I was in, the problem they had, they were drowning in work and couldn't prioritize anything. Everything was the most important project. And we couldn't find a way to kind of manage that flow, and we needed to find ways to kind of deal with it. So we kind of started shaping up some roles, who's who in the zoo. So in terms of kind of the product owner is a role you'll hear a lot, and they're the one who sets the priorities for the sprint and kind of are the primary point of contact for the business. So when the business comes up with ideas of things they want, they don't talk to the development team directly. There's a funnel. It protects the team, and it helps the product owner then takes the customer's understanding, and you prioritize the work. Which one's the most important to be done first? Which one's going to be done later? They manage like the backlog of work of all the things you could do and decide when things are ready to be done. The Scrum Master, very different to a project manager, but they kind of look at making sure the team's Scrum activities are done successfully and encourage the teams to grow and self-organize to make sure Scrum is done in transparency. It isn't just about running a few meetings. There's a lot they do in supporting and coaching the team and identifying the impediments and blocks to help teams become even more effective and more efficient. But the most important people are the development team, the people who actually can write code, because you're going to create the thing of value to the stakeholders and the end customers at the end of the day. People in chat, how many people are currently in what you would call a Scrum team or working in an agile environment? Just so I can get a flavour. I know you do, Sam, because I used to work with you. Okay, cool. What else we got? Okay, start using Jira. Okay, that's good. I'll mention some tools in a bit. Well, hopefully this might help give you some idea about how to get started. Cool. All right. Yeah, I used to too now. I stole this graphic off the internet rather than creating it myself, but you'll find loads of these. But it shows how simple it really is. At a high level for a team or whatever you're working on, there'll be a project vision which the PO or the product owner will be kind of helping shape and understand what the bits of functionality and what that vision is for that thing long term. And from that, you might get a rough release plan of stuff, the functionality of what you want coming out in different orders and what you go through. That's kind of a high level. So you've kind of got a target long term. But then as a team, you will then, before you start a sprint, you will do a planning session. You'll look at what kind of work you're going to do. And let's assume it's a 2-week sprint. The team will kind of look at what we're going to do for those 2 weeks and not try and do too many things. Just find what's the thing, what's the goal, and what's the value at the end of that sprint. And then for the rest of those 10 days, the team are implementing. You are doing that work, you're tracking it. But there is a checkpoint every day, normally in the morning. It's a daily scrum. And it's a 15-minute check-in as a group to kind of review where you're at of the stuff you said you were going to do and how far you've got. And it's a checkpoint. It's a really healthy thing. I mentioned about waterfall projects. You'd be like a weekly project meeting and review the plans and all this very, very important and wholesome stuff. But having a daily heartbeat, you know exactly where things are at, and you know where people are progressing, whether being honest or not. And you realize if you're talking about the same piece of work for 3 days, they may be having a problem, and you find ways to support them. And that's what Scrum Masters there to help them do. And at the end of the sprint, there'll be a sprint review where you kind of look back and see what has been achieved and maybe what not's been achieved. And then the team will do a retrospective to look at everything that's happened, look at how it's been done, and then you can factor those feedback loops into the planning for the next sprint, and off you go. Simple as that. Nothing complicated. You just got to start doing it. So what does a 2-week sprint look like? Roughly, this is what your diary may look like. I've taken out lunch, but I'm assuming you'll all have some point around about 12ish. There'll be a stand-up in the mornings. I do not recommend having stand-ups at 9 a.m. and never have been. 9:15, that's good. Gives people time to actually get into the office. And it's a 15-minute chat. You'll do a retro, like I said, to kind of reflect on what's happened. You'll do some sprint planning, start the sprint, and look at all that space for doing work. Feedback I've had many times from colleagues saying, oh, Agile, it's just lots of meetings. No, there's key ceremonies, but you can put in other meetings too. But that gives you room for there should be an adequate room there for doing pull requests and reviews and pair programming and best practice and sharing stuff. But it shouldn't be lots of little meetings. You know exactly where you need to be. And that's probably the cadence thing I'll keep coming back to. You know where you need to be. You know how much work you will have a conscience of where you know you should be by day 7 or day 8 of a sprint. You'll know that by day 8, if you haven't got to it, there's a high chance you may not finish it or may not start it. And that's cool because you're already starting to talk about it rather than disappointing at day 10. You're already setting expectation of where you are at and how's it going. Yeah, that gives you an idea. So I talked about creating a backlog. So in Agile, a backlog is basically a collection of user stories. There's lots of levels, and somebody mentioned Jira, Simon, I think you did, about tools, and there's different terminology, but it's basically made up of user stories. What are the tasks to develop features, enhancements, or fix bugs? And that backlog should be prioritized by value to the customer, and maybe to the team if you're looking at technical debt as well. And then basically they should be prioritized, and the high value ones at the top and the ones and should be ready to work on next, and the lower ones further down the bottom. And that's a living document, that backlog. The PO should help facilitate, or Scrum Master can help facilitate session to help clarify and prioritize what is it we're actually going to be doing, what's the next important thing, so to make sure that thing is always up to date. I've seen it in teams where they create massive backlogs and then there's a list of things that never get done. It's really important to kind of trim the fat at the end because it needs to be current. It doesn't need to be everything you ever thought of. And that backlog should be part of that discussion with like stakeholders to make sure that it kind of reflects the business goals of what they want. Oh, here we go. So I'm back to a question. We talked about Gantt charts. So everyone's like, but how much work can we do in a sprint, Chris? Now, some people say, you give people a list of jobs to do, say, oh, I need 3 days on that. Oh, I need about a week for that. Oh, that's a few days. And that's fine if it's stuff which is very, you've done it enough times. But if it's complex work, it's hard. If you write a piece of code, you know that it doesn't always go well the first time or the second. And there's bugs when you test it and you need someone else to review it. And then you might need, it's hard, especially, if it's stuff you haven't done before. And if you're using time, it's a bit wishy-washy and it's very hard to gauge when you've got enough work. And it's very easy to overcommit that you can't do everything you said you do in 2 weeks. So there's a tool that can be used called story points. And basically it's a way of measuring complexity of how hard it is to do something. It's an abstract, it's not tied to time. But the idea is that you'll talk about it and you can use a Fibonacci scale, whatever, to kind of work out how hard something is. But the team discuss it in sprint planning to make sure you all understand how hard it is to do a piece of work. So if we were doing it and I said, I'm going to write this piece of code and I think it's going to take 7 story points, and now I'll say, are you crazy? That's 9. And another will go, no, it's walk in the park, it's 3. That's fine, because you know what we're going to do is that you turn around and say, well, explain to me why you think that's easy or why you think that's hard. Because it's shared knowledge experience. One goes, oh, you do this, I've got this great hack, dead easy, does it automatically. And that goes, oh, no, I've done this, too many bugs. And you start talking about that in planning. It means you all understand how hard the work is you're going to do. So I'm going to fly through this. So teams will then end up with a capacity of story points. I used to give people roughly 10 or 15 over 15 over like 2 weeks or something like that. So there's a backlog of work and it's been prioritized, and you kind of look at that and say, oh, we've got a rough capacity of 35 points for a team. Well, we can definitely do it to use a story E. But F and G, the team may feel that seems a good wind, but we may not reach it. It could be a stretch goal. The team know where to draw the finish line, where to stop. You might have some bugs need to be factored in. They may not be estimated yet. The PO needs to say, does that need to be factored in as well as those user stories? But what this does is that once you've got an idea of capacity, you know what you can do and what you can't do. Now, when teams do this to start, they will get it horribly wrong for the first 3 or 4 sprints they do it. It'll be over-optimistic, under-egged, but after about 3 or 4, you'll know what you can do. And it's not a game about who can get the most story points. It's about who can make sure that you've got enough capacity to deliver the value of what's being asked to be done. And that's the thing about sustainability. I don't want people to be sweating. I don't want people to be, teams, when they're planning work, should not be thinking about how fast they need to run or how much they need to sharpen their pencil. Take it out of the equation. There's sums here. I can show my workings. And that is really powerful for teams. And people say, oh, what happens if you finish all the work early? Amazingly, every company has more work you can do and you can bring that in. But you're not doing it unnecessarily. You're doing it at the right point when you're saying, I'm ready for more work now. So this is a really useful tool. Big fan. Okay, someone's typing in chat. Simon, it's really tricky when I work at 10 projects at once. It's really hard to compare backlog items. Yes, this is when you need product owners to say, which of these 10 projects is the most important one? Because I'm pretty sure there'll be 2. And there'll be several ginger stepchildren as part of those projects, which you're like, no, don't need to do it. But yeah, it's tough. So I've gone through story points. I want to talk about tracking work. So once you've got that, this is effectively what your sprint board looks like. This is a very basic one. And you can see the signs. There's a list of things to do. You will then move them into progress. Then they'll be done and you bring the next things in. What this does is visualizes your work. You can do it in Jira and fancy things, but you can do it post-its on a big wall. But it gives you a sense of visibility. It gives you a sense of progress and where you're at. It doesn't hide And if things are loitering and in progress, you're saying, oh, that's a low value ticket. Why is it taking so long? That's a chance for a team to talk about it, stand up. So what it might be a case of how can I help? Simon say I can get involved in that, or Oliver could offer some fresh eyes on a piece of work. As a group, you look at this and go, okay. And the aim is you want to see all the tickets on the left move to the right. So that's just a standard workflow. But one of the nice things about Agile, you can then, what you may want to do is actually reflect how you work. Remember in in Waterfall Project, they just want to know when it's done. And maybe a little bit when it's right, but mainly when it's done. When you're writing code, there might be some other states you might go through. You might have a piece of work that's blocked. Call it out. That's the reason why you didn't get to it. And that gives the team, look at the impediments. How can we unblock it? What's the thing we can do to improve on it? You might want to call out project work that's really in review. Mentioning no names, I've seen many teams have a massive backlog of stuff in review just before the end of a sprint. Well, perhaps if you kind of work through that as you went, it'd be nice and steady. You wouldn't feel like you're kind of one big finish. But you can map how you work to track it to make sure it reflects what you do. And you do it at various levels. But it's a really good tool. And the last bit about feedback loops. Some people think this bit's a bit fluffy. How do you feel? What was it often? A retrospective is a reflection session, and where you talk about how was that for you. You look at that sprint of those last 10 days. You don't look about what you've done. That's in the sprint review. That's just showing what has been achieved. But you're talking about how you did it. And it's for the team, and it's a chance to be really honest about asking 5 questions. What went well? Look at the positives. What went wrong? What caused frustration? What should we do? What should we keep the same? And you might have read something somewhere. It's like, I've seen this new bit of code. There's a tool called Rust. We should start doing everything in Rust. Well, why don't we try it? Why don't we take some of that on? And what can we do to change how we approach our work for the next 10 days? Or maybe the next couple of sprints. And these retrospectives are kind of, it takes time to be honest with your team and to say, oh, that was a shocker. There's a great book called Radical Candor. If you ever get a chance to read it, it's a great way of how to give really constructive feedback without it being bitching and moaning. It's probably the nicest way to put it. But retrospective should be a way to kind of look at that. And a big thing of Agile is about identifying continual improvement and what you can always iterate. And some of these changes have been minor. Like saying, why don't we get 2 people to do pull requests? Or there all seems to be one person who seems to have a piece of work. Well, what can we do to kind of expand that knowledge? Can we do some pair programming? Can we do some mobbing on it? Can we do a training session? Do we share that knowledge and experience? These are things that I've seen come out of retrospectives. And what it's done for a team is realize, okay, well, we'll need to take time out of the sprint to do that learning. So we'll bring in less work. But what we're going to be able to do in the sprint afterwards, more of us will know how to write this code or understand this bit of functionality. So we'll actually be able to do more over the future sprints. So you'll see, Miro things and like going, oh, we're doing a retro thing about the Olympics, all this kind of stuff. Yeah, that's trying to make it easy, but that's the fluff to start off with. But as teams mature, and I was lucky enough to see this at Dyson, the teams I worked with them for over 6 years. And you get to the point where you don't need to have the fluffy stuff. You get to the point of saying, we can make this better, and you have really good conversations. So that's a bit of my fan of. So I talk about sprints, and you kind of look at a 2-week window, and then you do another sprint and another sprint. That works really well, but sometimes, especially if you work in big lumpy organizations like I might have done recently, they want to have kind of a longer term plan of what you're doing. So there's things you can do called planning increments, where basically you break this a year down into 10-week chunks, and you know where you are at week 1 to week 10, and there may be kind of a change of priority before you start the next planning increment. Now, what that does, it gives kind of enough of a horizon. So the reason why this is good is if I asked any of you, what are you doing in October next year? None of you will have a clue what you're doing. So there's no point planning masses in advance, like waterfall plans. We've got a plan for the next 3 years. You don't know what you're doing a week on Thursday. What this does is help kind of chunk up the year and say, okay, let's look at what we're doing now and what we might do next. And it's a really powerful way of kind of setting expectation. And within that, the diamonds are just kind of, I wanted to call out that it's a really good way of having checkpoints of where you can change and pivot and sensitive of progress and improvement. Lessons learned, retrospects is a great example. Lessons learned you do once at the end of a project. You do a retrospective every single week, every single sprint, sorry. So look at how many different opportunities there to iterate and try stuff out and get better, to be more effective as a team, to sense some recognition of what you've done. I think it's better than we need a monthly project plan, because monthly update, gives you a good cadence. And doing it by the 10-week chunks, it gives people an idea if they know where they need to be. It creates a really interesting just rhythm. We had a really interesting experience because when I put this in place, people said I wouldn't react to changes that came in because they'd come in at the wrong time. It's like, well, no, this is our rhythm. This is what we're doing. Can you introduce change at these windows because it'll help us to be more successful to factor your work in? And we adapted that as we went through. We were telling people, like, tell us what you think you want to do in week 3 and by week 8, so we know we can plan for it effectively for the next 10 weeks there. And we changed the customer's behavior. We changed how they asked for things. And it took the noise away. And it was magic, because then they could work anywhere they wanted, but they knew when they had to have things for us. And I think that's really important as you go through. So bringing it all back together, I've kind of chatted a lot here, but hopefully it's landed. Why I think Agile is better for planning. If nothing else, is people working in teams, it gives you a much richer experience of working with your colleagues. You approach everything as an us, not as I did that. It avoids the white knights on your team who try and strive to do everything themselves. And look what I achieved. Team sport. Everything from how you plan and how you discuss how you're going to size up your work and what you're going to do, to what you're going to commit to as a group to do the work. You work together to achieve the goals. That's really rewarding. It gets celebrated in every sprint review. You kind of look what we did. It builds trust through transparency because everyone can see what we're doing. You're not hiding away on a vague line on a Gantt chart. Here's a big Jira sprint board. We can all see the work we're doing. How can I help people? How can we achieve all those bits of work we go through? And because you're talking about reviewing stuff together and working as a group, there is better opportunity for knowledge sharing. It's really important. And then because you've got that regular cadence, you know where you should be in each sprint. You know yourself that if you haven't got all that work done by day 6 or 7, there might be a problem. How can we make it better? The ceremonies are very focused. It gives you more time to do work and how you want to do it yourselves. And retrospectives give you time to reflect and look for improvement. It's not just a nice to have. You see a lot of companies talk about continual improvement. This actually facilitates it because it's just a thing you do. And anyone who's had the displeasure to do retros with me, Matt, Sam, loads of people, it's a very constructive session. It's just there to help people find a way to make things better. And at the end of the day, it's that project success. You're focused on delivering value. What are we going to get at the end of this, sprint? What are we going to do? How are we achieving that capacity? Sustainable pace. I keep going on about it, but once you've got a rhythm of how much you can do, it really works well. And those reviews celebrate achievement. And it's great to have recognition from your peers internally, but also from the customer as well, because you get to see all the stuff you can do. So I'll get some questions in there. I will come back to those in a second. So I think those are the bits where I think Agile's better for planning. But I've got something for you to try if you want to. This is kind of homework, but choice is yours. I've got another one, but I typed this one up. This, especially if you're working in a waterfall environment, I would ask you to try and run a retro with your teams. You don't need to go on a fancy training course. You're literally having a conversation with people, and it's dead easy. So you can do it in any assortment of virtual tools, or even just on a big whiteboard with post-it notes in a meeting room somewhere. And you create 3 columns. Roses, buds, and thorns. And you're going to get post-its, and they're going to be dropped into those 3 categories. The roses are things which bring joy. What are the things you've been doing over the last couple of weeks which have been really successful? We should call that out because roses are lovely and they smell nice. And then you might identify some buds, things which are nearly there, but they need looking after. They might need to be supported. What can you do there? And the last one, what things are causing you pain? What are the thorns? And you do that, you get people to be very quiet and write lots of post-it notes in 5 minutes, and you kind of get enough, and you should have maybe 20-ish. And then what you then do for each category is you go through, you talk about maybe about 7 minutes for each one. Which of those ones, those post-its, do you think need attention? And then at the end, of the ones you've identified, pick 3, just 3. And for the last 7 minutes, what actions could you take to improve those things? Now, I will say, you don't always just have to focus on the things which are causing you pain. If you're doing something, there's something, one of the roses, which is really good, something positive, how can you do more of it? It's really important. But that's a really nice exercise you can go through as a group. It may take you 45 minutes. I know people may not like talking, but it's a good starting exercise. It's what you can do. But I think it's fun. So, anyone bold enough in chat to commit that they might do that? And ask from a random person you've chatted to on the internet? Seeing if anyone's going to have the gumption to say, yes, I will. Yeah, we'll come back to it. Other bits, because there's probably a junkyard of stuff. There are bits that get away. This is the topic I can talk chapter and verse about. There are many good books I can recommend, and this is just a start of stuff I was thinking about I could talk about. There's things like developing against minimal viable products, how to build effective teams, the joy of free metrics, how to create psychological safety in a team, how to break down work in terms of features, epics, and stories. Tools that have been used, you've seen Jira mentioned, there's loads. How to get Scrum teams going from good to great and road mapping and stuff. And that's just scratching the surface. But it's a topic I think I'm really passionate about. I think agile is the most, I think all of the stats are around 86% of software development companies use it. For teams that, every company does it differently, every team does it differently. But I think it helps you have control on what you're being asked to deliver and what you're being asked to commit to. And it's transparent, which is one of the 3 pillars of, agile in terms of, you're not trying to hide away. If things are going well, great, celebrate it. But things are going badly, cool. Talk about it, get it out in the open early, and then you can do something about it. Whereas unlike waterfall projects, bad news, the thing I thought I'd finish tomorrow, it's going to take another 2 weeks. Why didn't you tell me sooner? There's ways and means. Anyhow, I've been Chris Williams. That's why planning is not a dirty word.